Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about Niels Bohr and light, okay? Now, what he did was very important in describing the structure of an atom or the structure of an electron cloud, and he used light to do this. So we're going to kind of discuss what that looked like. So remember, Niels Bohr said that electrons were in energy levels, which is true, okay? He said that it was, they rotated around the nucleus like planets, which is not true. But we do still use his model today to kind of describe what energy levels or how electrons are organized, just because it's a simpler model than Erwin Schrödinger's, which is kind of more of a, remember that's the cloud model, and they have probability clouds. Now, his research with light and electron energy levels is very important, and it kind of helps us, again, describe what the electron configurations look like. Now, the electron cloud is made up of energy levels which are like these steps of a ladder, but they are not evenly spaced. Okay, so when you think of steps of a ladder, you think that as you go up a ladder, they're all evenly spaced. Now, the electron cloud is like steps of a ladder. It's steps of a ladder in terms of energy levels, but these energy levels are not evenly spaced. Now, the amount of energy possessed by an electron determines its energy level. So each electron has a certain amount of energy. Okay, it exists at a certain energy. And so depending on how much energy the electron has, determines what energy level it's in. So levels further from the nucleus represent higher energy. So the further away you get from the nucleus, the higher the energy is, and the higher energy that electron possesses. So electrons like to hang out where they are most stable, okay? Most stable, which this is called their ground state, okay? When they're in their ground state, they're just chilling, okay? They're just chilling. They're not uncomfortable. That's kind of how I like to think about it. They are just where they are most comfortable. This is the exact amount of energy they like to possess. It's the electron's home. So again, the ground state is where the electron likes to exist. Now, all electrons have their own ground state, whether that be level 1 or level 2 or level 8. Now, when electrons gain a quanta or amount of energy, okay, so energy, last time we talked about how light exists as a wave, but light can also exist as a particle, and that particle is called a photon, and that photon is a quanta of energy. It's basically an energy packet. So when an electron gains a quanta or amount of energy through sources such as extreme heat or electricity, the electron will jump up energy levels. And this process is called excitation. Okay, it gets excited. Think about you when you're wake up in the morning, you're kind of just chilling, you're probably tired, you know, from the day before, and then you drink an energy drink, and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of energy. Or think of like a child who you give candy to, all of a sudden they have a whole bunch of energy, okay? That's kind of like the electron. The electron gains energy, and it becomes excited, just like a little kid who eats a whole bunch of candy. Now, eventually what's going to happen is that it can't remain in this excited state. So this excited state is very temporary, okay? Just like a kid is not going to remain excited all of the time. Eventually you're going to crash. So electrons can't stay excited at their higher energy level forever. When they fall back to their ground state, they will lose extra energy in the form of a packet of light. Okay, this packet of light, this quanta of light, is a photon. It's a process called relaxation. relaxation. Okay, relaxation. So basically, just like a little kid eventually crashes from a sugar high, what's going to happen is these electrons can't stay in the higher energy levels. These are not their ground state, and so what they're going to do is they're going to fall. Now, when they fall, what's going to happen is energy is going to be released in the form of a photon, okay? And this photon is what we can actually see. We see this in the form of light. Now, remember, on the EMF spectrum, we can only see a certain wavelength, and we see that wavelength as color, okay? So we're going to talk about that in a second. Now, these are what the energy levels look like. Now, our lowest energy level is the first energy level, okay? And then it goes up as we increase. Why did I put a 3 there? This is a 5, okay? I can't count. So as we go up, what's happening is, say the nucleus is down here. We have our first energy level. That's the lowest energy level. And then as you go further away from the nucleus, the energy is going to increase, okay? Now, what's going to happen is, say you have an electron in the first energy level. That electron may gain energy in the form of, say, light or heat. Okay, so either light or heat. Some way it's going to gain some energy, just like you drink an energy drink, and it's going to jump up energy levels. So say it jumps from the first energy level to the third energy level after it gains that energy. So electrons gain energy in a process known as excitation, or another way of calling it is absorption. Okay, absorption, just like you absorb, I don't know, energy from an energy drink, it's going to absorb energy from light or heat. Now, remember, the electron can't stay in that excited state, okay? The electron's not going to stay up here in the third energy level because that's not its home. That's not where it's comfortable. And so what's going to happen is the electron is eventually going to fall back down to its ground state. When it falls back down to its ground state, it's going to release that energy. Now, the amount of energy released is how many energy levels it jumps. So the difference between energy levels is how much energy it's going to release. And when it releases that, it releases this in the form of light. This is visual light that we can see. Okay, this light may be a certain color depending on how much energy is released. Okay, if it's not a lot of energy, it could be the color red. If it's a lot of energy, it could be violet. Now, it's not always going to release in the visible light spectrum. We may see it in ultraviolet or infrared. But there are some energy that's going to be released that we can see. So electrons lose energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation or light. This process is known as relaxation or emission. Okay, so if something is emitted, that means it's emitted out. Okay, it's released. Now, so again, if you say you went from energy level 3 to 2, so say an electron was excited, it jumped from the second energy level to the third, and it's jumping back down from 3 to 2. That's not a lot of energy, okay? That's just one energy level difference. This will release less energy, which we may see in the form of a red light. Now, if we go from energy level from 5 to 2, so say it jumped up to energy level 5 and dropped back down to 2, this is going to release more energy because there's a bigger difference between those two, and we may see this in the form of violet light. Okay, so the more energy levels that are jumped, the shorter the wavelength that's emitted, because remember, the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. Okay, now when we jump these energy levels, okay, there are certain wavelengths that are emitted, like I said, in certain colors. Now, these wavelengths that are emitted can be lined out on this line, what we call a line spectrum. This line spectrum shows these certain wavelengths of light that are emitted. Now, these electrons aren't going to just emit one wavelength. It may emit several. Even hydrogen emits 4 because the electron is jumping maybe from 1 to 2, from 1 to 3, from 1 to 5 very quickly, and so it's releasing different wavelengths. Okay? So, each possible energy fall corresponds to a different energy. Okay? So remember, different energy amount, which means that corresponds to a different wavelength. So remember, each wavelength has a different energy. The shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. And this is the wavelength of light. Okay? Some of the falls can be detected by the human eye as they fall in the visible range, so we see this as color. But other falls that are not visible must be detected by instruments, okay, as they are infrared or ultraviolet. We cannot see infrared or ultraviolet. Now, different elements have different energies associated with their energy levels. This means that similar falls in different elements will produce different light. Okay? Each element has their own light spectrum. Okay? Think of it like a fingerprint. If copper is excited, it's going to be releasing different wavelengths than if zinc is excited. Okay? We may see this as different colors, but if we put this on a line spectrum, which we're going to kind of go into more in a second, it's going to be, they're going to release it, it's going to show that it's releasing different wavelengths. So each element has its own specific fingerprint. And so this is how we know that stars, or what stars are made of, because we cannot see, or we cannot take a sample of a star. But what we can do is take a star and we can concentrate its light to find the visible light spectra. Okay, so when we observe color being produced from an element undergoing relaxation, we are observing all the visible falls simultaneously occurring. So these falls are all simultaneously occurring. We can use these things like a prism or a spectroscope to break apart that light into its individual colors, resulting in a bright line spectrum, or spectra. Okay, so basically what happens is here, this is kind of how they figured this out. So what they have here is a tube full of hydrogen gas. And what they did is they ran an electrical current through the tube, and they saw that it actually glowed like a light pink or a lavender. And so what they did is they concentrated that light through this slit and then ran that concentrated light through a prism. And when they did that, it didn't show the full rainbow as if you would run light, because if you run white light through a prism, it shows a rainbow. But this is kind of pink light. What it did is it just showed certain lines at certain wavelengths. Okay? And this is hydrogen's bright line spectrum. And so this is how we can tell what stars are made of. We can take that light and concentrate it, run it through a prism. Now it's a more technical machine that we do this. But we can see that hydrogen's light spectra is going to be the same regardless. Hydrogen's light spectra is always going to have 4 lines at these wavelengths. And so, like I said, it's kind of like a little fingerprint of the element. And so down here, we have an example of light spectra. So we have lithium, cadmium, strontium, and a mixture of these. And it says, based on the bright line spectra above, identify the elements found in the mixture. So this is a mixture of different elements, and we are going to compare them to their light spectra of the first 3. Now, if you look over here, our first wavelengths within the 700, or before 700, really, I guess that would be like 725 and 650 range, we see that it matches pretty well with strontium. Okay, these 3 lines do. And this line in between doesn't match with cadmium, but it matches with lithium. Okay, And then we have this next line, which matches with cadmium, but it also matches with lithium. Now, what we can do is we can rule cadmium out, because if you look, before we even started, cadmium is supposed to have these two lines here. But in our sample, it does not have those two lines, okay? If we go over, we see that this line lines up with lithium. The second one lines up, well, the next three line up with strontium. This line lines up with strontium and lithium, and these last two lines line up with strontium, okay? So while one line did line up with cadmium, most of these lines are from strontium and lithium. You have to have all of these lines from strontium and lithium in order for it to be recognized. So these are from strontium and lithium. Okay, strontium and lithium. Now on the next page, there is kind of a review that goes over these notes, talking about excitation or relaxation. Now N is the abbreviation for energy level. Okay, so if you see N, that's talking about energy level. So y'all go through and kind of go through these examples.